So let me briefly define civic engagement. So I usually understand civic engagement as citizens' participation in public activities that are aimed to improve some aspects of the society, to promote the public good of the society. So this includes a variety of the types of civic engagement, from volunteering to collecting donations or making donations, and to public debates and activism, all of which are aimed to solve some problems reviewed in a big crisis or event such as this one, the coronavirus event. So let's talk about volunteering first. So in the wake of this outbreak, Chinese citizens in and outside of China quickly began to donate money through online crowdfunding and some more traditional forms of volunteering. For example, I saw on Weixin very early, just immediately after the outbreak, that private car owners organized themselves to help doctors and nurses commute because buses all stop. And one of the groups I observed even had about 4,000 car owners. So this kind of a traditional volunteering, face-to-face volunteering stopped after Wuhan prohibited private cars from driving. But in other places, this volunteering never stopped. For example, people organized themselves into groups, were organized by homeowners and committees or homeowner associations to do grocery shopping together and receive and distribute online shopping deliveries at the residential area. Sometimes becoming vigilante at the checkpoints to check people's temperature and receive, packages and so on and so forth. All these forms are what I call the compassion despite politics. Despite all the draconian quarantine, surveillance, and the political controversies, there's still warm undercurrents of mutual helping and engagement in public activities. Another form of civic engagement is engaging in public debates. People are also actively engaged in public debates over various issues, such as the debate over the government's lack of transparency, slow response, and the Red Cross scandal. So this form of engagement is politics of compassion, which is not compassion despite politics. In other words, the expression of a compassion through open debates within the public sphere and also with some political implications. And this kind of debate is certainly affected by the political structure and particularly the censorship from the government. One particularly important moment about this kind of a public debate was the death of Dr. Li Wenliang, one of the early whistleblowers. We have seen a huge sudden wave of expression of sorrow, anger, online and offline. Some people actually did the offline mourning. They went to the hospital where the doctor actually used to work and used the whistles, the actual whistles, blowing the whistle to pay tribute to the doctor and to express that if you cover up the truth and the consequences will be very tragic and also devastating. But most people actually forwarded his pictures and made memes online and vehemently criticized the Chinese government's lack of transparency and slow response and the effort to cover up the information about the virus. I believe that WeChat and Weibo, because people are under quarantine, so there's no way for you to do face-to-face interactions, now become the major ways of interaction. If you open a WeChat now, it's not just the communication or posting online. It has a lot of things integrated into this app. You can buy things online, you can make payments, you can organize a lot of things. So with this app, with a cell phone, and that actually sort of facilitated interactions and the civic engagement to some extent, such as buying groceries together for the whole building. Some volunteers I observed online, they do psychology. They have already had a psychological training, so they offer online counseling, and also people organize donations online and through crowdfunding, and also transmitting information about the demands from hospitals, from even individual doctors and nurses. Another interesting form of engagement was just by one person. This person is a writer whose name is Fang Fang. She was a very famous writer even before the virus issue, and a Wuhan local person. And she kept her diaries online, which were widely spread and discussed. So she basically talked about her experience on the quarantine and fairly honestly air her grievances about the local situations, sometimes criticize the government. The censorship tried to block her account, deleted her posts, but you saw that the posts actually emerged elsewhere. Think about, 1.4 billion people online. So the volume of information is huge, and which actually overwhelms the state censorship. So you saw 10 minutes after a post was deleted, emerged again. And that actually challenged the state's control and also facilitated some of the public debates. So now if you are on Weixin, you hear a lot of critical voices are still ongoing despite all the censorship effort by the government. Let me talk about Sichuan earthquake, which is the one that I'm most familiar with. So I want to say the scale of civic engagement after the outbreak was certainly not as large as the one after the Sichuan earthquake, when back then millions of people went to Sichuan and elsewhere to help. So this time we don't see this huge wave of convergence in Wuhan. Again, this can be explained by the feature of the disaster being an epidemic, and people try to avoid contacts and interactions. And also at the local level, as I mentioned, the top-down total control and quarantine also prevented associations and small groups from playing a bigger role. And the response was basically dominated by the government, leaving very limited room for spontaneous action. But it also can be explained by some long-term trends since 2013, when President Xi Jinping came into power. I would say civil society scholars now all agreed that the constraints on civil society since 2013 is getting stronger and stronger. Particularly the restrictions over NGOs' funding sources and institutional controls through the party, not just through the government, but through the party, because the party tried to build branches in NGOs, which is a big step forward in terms of the control. And also the civic associations did not have enough social and financial room to develop its own capacity to deal with such a big disaster. Not just the number of the NGOs or the money they can collect, but also the specialization. So in this response, I don't see a lot of NGOs with professional specialization in medical, in emergency, in public health to respond. Another difference is that in the wake of this disaster, we don't see a lot of citizens' advocacy and activism. So in 2008, there was a very important advocacy that was from the liberal intellectuals and media to propose a national mourning for the Sichuan earthquake victims. That was historically unprecedented because it was the first time that the Chinese government mourned these ordinary citizens instead of the leaders. But it was raised by the public sphere and accepted by the Chinese government. But this time we saw the spontaneous mourning for Dr. Li Wenliang, but the voices of advocacy were not as strong as those in the Sichuan earthquake. There was no advocacy for a national mourning, and the Chinese government actually didn't think about it. I saw somewhere posts to talk about whistleblowing laws or something like that, but it wasn't responded by the Chinese government. So I guess part of the reason was that the heavier restrictions on the public sphere, particularly on the public opinion since President Xi came into power, probably some of the measures used to respond to the virus, such as the total control over the grassroots society. Once the virus is gone, maybe those measures will exist or persist in the government's practices, monitoring citizens, this control over the grassroots society may be the new normal.